Welcome to Hope One Live, ladies and gentlemen. What is the easiest way to win an argument? What can you do? Well, before we get to that, we're going to go to Q&A after we have this short introduction about the easiest way to win an argument. And the Q&A will be live via Skype. You can be on live with us, and the great Jorge Gill is going to show you how to do that. So, Jorge, come on and tell these fine folks how they can be live with us on video tonight.
It's pretty simple, Frank. All they have to do is follow the instructions. Okay, so for everybody who are watching, we have over 150 people watching live right now. So just pay attention. I'm gonna show you pretty easy how you can submit. And this is what I want to say, Frank, quickly. What they need to do is the following. They need to give us their Skype ID. If they want to participate, it is not that you are going to send us your questions via Skype, is that you are going to be part of the show via Skype. So the whole idea is for you to show up in camera and then have a dialogue with Frank. So I'm going to show you step by step, because in the previous shows, we had a ton of errors from the people submitting their questions through Skype. The moment they put in their Skype ID, they fail, and then I'm not able to find them. So this is what you have to do. It's pretty simple. Just follow the instructions.
It's easy.
It's easy, yeah. All you have to do is come to crossexamine.org/SQ. Stands for Skype questions. crossexamine.org/SQ. Once you're here on this part of the website, this is a landing page with a form. You have to fill it out. The first one, as you can see here, is your name. That is your government name. The second one is called your Skype ID. And if you hover over it, you see that it has a set of instructions to the right-hand side. Your Skype ID is usually formulated. It goes something like live, John Doe _123. That's just an example. Or you can also insert there the email that you use to sign in or log into your Skype account. So that's what your Skype ID here is. Okay, please do not put your name twice. That's not what I want. And
we're not going to be able to call you.
Yeah, that's been just happening too many times, Frank. They need to put in their Skype ID. So once you're there, you put your Skype ID, whether it's live, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or whatever, a series of numbers and characters that Skype automatically assigned to you. That would allow me to find you and send you a message and bring you in. So when I send you a message, you have to make sure also that you have your notifications turned on Skype. Because sometimes I send somebody a message and they see it at the end of the show and they say, hey, man, how come you're not going to let me in? Well, it took you an hour to respond. I ain't got time for that, because we have to keep it moving. We have a lot of people that are going to come on live. Okay, so that's the idea. Make sure that you put in your Skype ID. Then you make a choice. You let us know whether you're a Christian, an atheist, an agnostic, or other, maybe a Muslim or a Buddhist. We will love to talk to anyone. Okay, make sure that you have great questions. Now, in this box, all you have to do is give us a brief summary of your question. Okay, a brief summary of your question. So you have a word limit of 25 words. And this is not for you to give us your question, your entire question, just a brief overview so our team can look at it and decide whether we're going to choose your question or not. We do reserve that right. So the best questions are the ones that we're going to bring onto the show. And with that, a few things before we go back, Frank. When you join us on Skype, I will ring you up. You don't have to call me. I will message you and I will let you know when it's time for you to get online. Okay, when you are when I send you, make sure that if you're using a laptop, if you have headphones, great. If you have a little microphone, great. But the laptop is automatic this framing, which is 16:9. If you're on a phone, make sure that your phone is on a horizontal style like this one. Okay, just like that, and make sure that the light, if you're in front of a window, is not gonna. If you're in front of a window, make sure that the light is coming and reflecting your face, not your back. If the light is coming from the back and you're not well illuminated, well lit up from the front, then we're gonna have a problem trying to see you. You're gonna look like you're in a witness protection program or something like that. So we have to make sure that you have plenty of lights. If you had headphones, better, and you turn off the live stream so we can actually talk live with you. All right. And with that being said, Frank, back to you.
All right, here we go. Now, we're talking about the easiest way to win an argument. When I talk about an argument, I'm not talking about a fight, okay? I'm talking about trying to jointly reason to a true conclusion or a valid conclusion. And a lot of you probably have seen some of the Q&A that we've done on college campuses. And if you notice, first of all, a Q&A on a college campus is a little bit artificial because you don't have really a whole lot of time to go back and forth with somebody when there's a whole big audience watching, because there are other people in line and you can't spend a whole bunch of time on one question when you got people in line. So what I'm about to tell you is really more for a private conversation that you can have with somebody where you have sufficient time. How can you win an argument if in fact you are in the right? Well, I think what you need to do is you need to look at the assumption behind the point that the person is trying to make that you think is false. What are the assumptions behind what the person you're talking to has that you need to expose as being false? And quite frequently, the assumptions come in a number of areas. Sometimes the assumption is that they think they have the truth when in fact the truth that they are allegedly putting forth is actually self-contradictory. So we'll talk about that in just a second. A lot of times these conversations that you're having with people revolve around rights. They say they have a right to a certain thing. Particularly, you're having a debate over a moral issue that's in the public square right now. They think they have a right to a certain thing. Well, what are they assuming when they think they have a right to something? Well, first of all, they're assuming a standard. And they're assuming someone has given us rights that other people are obligated to honor. Those are assumptions that you might want to question, or at least you might want to ask, what is the standard by which you're coming up with this right? Who has given you this right? Why do you think this is true? So you want to ask questions to talk about the standard. A lot of times people will make claims about morality or evil, or we might say immorality and evil. An atheist, for example, might say, well, there can't be a good God because there's too much evil in the world. Now, what is that person assuming when they make such a statement? Well, they're assuming a lot of things, and that's why you've got to ask questions. The first question you want to ask is, first of all, what do you mean by evil? And why do you think that is evil? And by what standard are you arguing that such and such a thing is evil? And if you're claiming that the God of the Bible is evil, by what standard are you judging him? So you always want to question, or at least expose, the assumptions behind someone is saying. So in those three areas, I find this happens frequently. When people are making truth claims that are actually self-contradictory, when people are claiming they have certain rights, or when people are saying something is evil or is immoral, or maybe God is evil, is immoral, what they are doing is they are assuming certain things that you need to question them on. Let's take the first category, truth. You hear people saying there's no truth, or all truth is relative, right? These are claims about truth that are actually self-contradictory. As you know, when people claim there's no truth, you simply need to ask that person, is that true? Is it true that there's no truth? Because if it's true that there's no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. In other words, this is a self-defeating statement. It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. If I were to say I can't speak a word in English, you would immediately say, well, you're using English to say that. When someone claims it's true that there is no truth, they are obviously committing an error. They are actually uttering a self-defeating statement. It just violates the law of non-contradiction, and all you need to do is ask them, is it true that there's no truth? And hopefully the light bulb will go off in their head. Or if they say all truth is relative, you can ask them, is that a relative truth? You want to apply the claim to itself. Or if someone claims you can't know anything, you're going to ask them what? How do you know that you can't know anything? Because you obviously know that. Or if somebody claims you should doubt everything, you want to say, should I doubt that? That claim that you just made, that we should doubt everything. Because you don't doubt that claim, and you're saying we should doubt everything. You're not doubting that claim. Or if someone says you ought not judge, you know the answer to this. Isn't that a judgment? That's a judgment that people are making when they say you ought not judge. Quite obviously, we wouldn't be alive very long if we didn't make judgments. And people are making judgments all the time. The only question is, are your judgments true? And Jesus didn't say don't judge. He said, judge not lest you be judged. By the same standard you judge others, you'll be judged by that standard. So Jesus isn't telling us not to judge. He's telling us how to judge. Don't judge hypocritically. Elsewhere in John 7:24, he says, stop judging by mere appearances and make a right judgment. Because everybody's making judgments. Whether you're a Christian or not, you're making judgments. If you're an atheist, you're making judgments there's no God. You're making judgments that Jesus didn't rise from the dead, that the Bible is false, that there is no objective meaning to life. These are all judgments. The only question is, are your judgments true? So that first category about truth is pretty easy to detect if you get used to looking for it. And by the way, this is all I pretty much do when it comes to answering questions. I pretty much just try and figure out what's the assumption that the person is making that person needs to support. Because, well, maybe their assumption's true and they can support it, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's self-defeating. Maybe it's logically, self-referentially false when they say there's no truth, or you can't know anything, or there is no objective truth, right? If you say there's no objective truth, that's an objective truth claim that there is no objective truth. So these are things you need to look for when you're having a conversation with someone, when you're having an argument, not a fight. Again, I'm not talking about fighting. I'm talking about trying to reason to valid conclusions. You've got to expose, or at least question, the assumptions behind what the other person is saying. So they do that with truth, and quite frequently, I've noticed that many people are uttering self-defeating statements. How about the second category, when they're talking about rights? Again, people will say, I have a right to an abortion. Okay, well, first of all, where do rights come from? If there's no God, there are no rights, because rights are something you have regardless of what anybody thinks about them, including your government. Rights are granted to you by the Creator, and everyone else is obligated to respect those rights from a moral perspective anyway. If God doesn't exist, there are no rights, because there are no wrongs either. There just is behavior. There's no right behavior or wrong behavior. There's no dignity to human beings that grants them rights. In fact, when people claim that they have rights, what are they assuming? That they are valuable creatures that other creatures need to respect. Well, if there's no God and human beings aren't any qualitatively better in an objective sense than animals or roaches or anything else, how can we have rights? We don't have rights. They're just preferences that we might have. Rights only come from God. Of course, the founding document of the United States of America affirms that. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Notice that these rights come from the Creator. And they come from the Creator because if they came from government, it wouldn't be a right. Because if your government changes and they decide they no longer support that right, do you no longer have it? No, of course you still have it, because it doesn't come from government. If rights came from government, there would be no way for us to say the Nazis were wrong in World War II, because the Nazi soldiers were just following the orders of their government. What we did at Nuremberg is we came in and we said, no, you have a moral obligation to disobey immoral orders, because there's a standard beyond your government. That standard is God's nature, sometimes called international law, sometimes called the moral law that C.S. Lewis would call. This is the law written on your heart that Paul talks about in Romans chapter 2. Okay, so these rights exist only because a creator exists. So if anyone's going to argue for rights, whether it's for abortion or the other hot button issues like transgenderism or same-sex marriage or even natural marriage or the right to life, it cuts both ways. You have to have a standard beyond humanity to claim that these are rights. Otherwise, whoever has the power just gets to decide who has what right and who has another right, or who has what preference and who has another preference. If there's no God that adjudicates between different human opinions, then they aren't rights, they're just preferences. Now, sometimes when you're arguing, again, about these things, not fighting, you're just arguing about these things, sometimes people will call you names. These are called ad hominem attacks. These are attacks on the man. They're not attacks on the argument. Someone may call you a bigot. Okay, when they say that, you want to ask them what they mean by it. So when someone calls you a bigot, don't say, well, I'm not a bigot. Ask them, what do you mean by bigotry? I asked a same-sex marriage advocate once. He called me a bigot. I said, what do you mean by bigotry? He said, fear and intolerance. I said, that's not the definition of bigotry. First of all, those are just two other words that need definition. The definition of bigotry is having a firm opinion on a particular issue without having investigating it, without really even knowing the issue, having prejudged an issue. And I said, with all due respect, if anyone's a bigot in this conversation, it's not me, it's you, because I've written an entire book on this topic that you haven't read. You don't even know why I hold the position I hold. And you might also ask, you're calling me a bigot, and you're assuming that bigotry is wrong. Why would it be wrong if there's no God? You see, nothing's right or wrong if there's no God. But in order for your position to be true, that you have a right to a certain thing, God would have to exist. And if God does exist, does he agree with your position? Or does his nature say something different than your position is true? So when people call you names, don't wilt or don't say, well, I'm not a bigot. Just say, what do you mean by bigotry? Or if they call you a racist for some reason, you might say, what do you mean by racism? And why do you think that's true? What evidence do you have for that position? By the way, back to bigotry for just a second. When someone calls you a bigot and you ask, what do you mean by that? I think they're going to be in trouble right away, because no matter how they define it, they're going to be in trouble. If they say, well, you don't agree with me, why does that make me a bigot? Because if disagreeing with you makes me a bigot, doesn't you disagreeing with me make you a bigot? I mean, bigotry is just a word they're trying to use to shut you up. And by the way, they're assuming a standard. They're assuming that there's something wrong with bigotry. Now, we agree there's something wrong with bigotry, but only because God does exist. Many times these people who are throwing insults around don't even believe in God, and yet they're stealing a standard from God as they're saying he doesn't exist. They're stealing morality to try and support immorality. Notice that immorality is always, or at least frequently, supported with moral-sounding phrases. Or immoral sounding phrases. You're shamed into believing the truth about an issue because they call you a bigot or a homophobe or a racist or something like that, even though none of those things are true about you. And by the way, even if they were true about you, that wouldn't necessarily make your argument wrong. Again, it's an attack on the man. It's not an attack on the argument, on the evidence. So they're assuming a standard in order to even make the claim. Now, how about this third category? We talked about truth. A lot of people utter self-defeating truth claims, and the easiest way to win that argument is to point out that the issue is self-defeating by saying, when they say there's no truth, you might ask them, is that true, right? Applying the claim to itself. When they start arguing for rights, then you've got to ask them, by what standard do you claim that you have this right? Where does this obligation come from if there's no God? Let me say one other thing about that, by the way. Sometimes people can understand this concept better by using a sports analogy I've used before. How do you know that your quarterback throwing a touchdown is better than your quarterback throwing an interception? Well, you know that because you know the goal of the game. There's a purpose to the game for your team to score more points than the other team. The touchdown gives you more points. The interception does not. It may take away points, or it may cause the other team to get points, actually. And you don't want that, because the purpose of the game is to score more points than the other team. You only know whether a play is a good play or a bad play from your side if you know the goal of the game. Same thing is true in life. You only know that a particular action is good or bad if you know the purpose of life. And the only way there can be an objective purpose to life is if God exists. If God doesn't exist, then it's a free-for-all of human opinion, just your opinion against somebody else's opinion. Yeah, Mother Teresa might have liked to help people, but Hitler liked to murder them. How do you adjudicate between those two positions if there's no God? You can't say Mother Teresa was better than Hitler unless there's a standard beyond both Mother Teresa and Hitler that all humans are obligated to obey. That standard can only be God's nature. It just can't be a bunch of human beings getting together and saying, we think this is true. I mean, they may get it right, but they can only get it right is if God exists. Otherwise, it's just power. It's just using power to put forth a point. Now, the third category, as I mentioned, is immorality and evil. A lot of times you'll hear atheists talking about, well, the God of the Bible is evil, or there's too much evil in the world, so there can't be a good God. When people claim these things, you have to stop and ask them, by what standard are you judging this to be evil? What do you mean by evil, first of all? Give me a definition of evil. And you'll find that people will try and give you examples of evil rather than a definition. They'll say things like, well, rape is evil or murder is evil. And at that point, you got to go, time out. No. I'm not talking about examples of evil. I'm talking about a definition of evil. And you will find they will have a very hard time coming up with a definition of evil without referring to good, because that's what evil is. It's a privation or a lack in good. Evil does not exist on its own. Evil only exists in a good thing. Evil is like cancer. If you take all the cancer out of a good body, you've got a better body. What happens if you take all the body out of the cancer? It doesn't exist. You can't do that, right? Evil is like rust in a car. If you take all the rust out of a car, you got a better car. If you take all the car out of the rust, what do you got? Can't do that. There's nothing there. In other words, evil is a parasite in good. So if you're going to claim something's evil, you have to presuppose something is good. But if you're presupposing something as being good, then you're presupposing God, because what we mean by objective good is God's nature. It's just not my opinion or your opinion or Hitler's opinion or Mother Teresa's opinion or the United States Constitution's opinion or anybody else's opinion. It's got to be grounded in something outside of us. And many atheists, of course, are claiming, well, the God of the Bible can't be good because he kills the Canaanites in the Old Testament or whatever, okay? We can deal with that objection directly if you want to later. But what they're doing is they're assuming a moral standard. They're stealing a standard from God while they're claiming God doesn't exist. This, by the way, is the subject of this book I wrote called Stealing from God: Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case. Just about every argument that I make in this book is based upon the principle I'm talking about to you tonight, and that is you've got to evaluate the assumptions or challenge the assumptions or at least question the assumptions behind the claims that people you're talking to are making. And you will find that quite frequently, either their claim is self-defeating, it assumes a standard they don't have, or there's some other error in there that you can detect, and that is the easiest way to win an argument. To point out that the position your opponent is coming from is either self-defeating or assumes a standard that person's worldview does not have. They have to steal a standard from God while claiming he doesn't exist. By the way, when I mentioned evil and immorality, why do we sometimes call things that are evil immoral? Because it's a negation of a good thing. Immorality is a negation of morality. It's a privation in a good thing. That's why we use words like immorality or unjust. Unjust means not just. But there's no unjust unless just exists. There's no injustice unless justice exists, in other words. And so you need to point this out. And this is literally, probably 70% of the questions I get are in some way, if the person asking the question is trying to come against Christianity, in some way, they're assuming a standard that either is self-defeating or they're making a claim that's either self-defeating or they're assuming a standard that they don't have from their own worldview. There's no objective standard of rightness or justice or goodness in an atheistic worldview. There's no way to justify that from an atheistic perspective. And yet they're claiming that injustice and immorality somehow exists in the Bible or from the God of the Bible, or some Christians have done something wrong to them. So again, the key here is to look at the assumptions someone is making. Let me give you just a couple of quick examples of this before we go to your questions from atheists. You've probably heard Richard Dawkins famously say, the God of the, by the way, Dawkins, a great writer. Look what he says in his book, The God Delusion. I mean, he says this so well. The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction, jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. Those are his good qualities. I just added that. Anyway, now, if you just take the Old Testament at face value without really understanding the context or what's going on there, some of those things you might agree with Dawkins on. You go, yeah, what's all this business about killing the Canaanites and all this? That does seem evil. It does seem unjust. But when Dawkins makes that claim, what is he assuming? He's assuming a standard of morality that, even by his own admission, Dawkins doesn't have in atheism. In fact, Dawkins said this elsewhere. He says this: in a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt and other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason to it, nor any justice. There is at the bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. Well, look, Dr. Dawkins, you can't have it both ways. You can't say the God of the Bible is unjust on one hand, and on the other hand, say there is no justice. You can't do that. You're trying to have it both ways. On one hand, rightfully, from your atheistic perspective, you're saying there is no justice. On the other hand, you're trying to somehow charge the God of the Bible with injustice when you just got done admitting there is no justice. You have to steal a standard from God in order to say that he's unjust. Sam Harris does the same thing when he claims we don't have free will. He doesn't think he has free will. What question are you going to ask someone like Sam Harris who says we don't have free will? You're going to ask him the question, did you freely come to that conclusion? Because if you didn't, why should we trust it as being true? If you're just a molecular machine, a moist robot, you're a moist robot, you don't have free will. Every thought you have is driven by the laws of physics, which is what Sam Harris believes. Why should we believe anything you think, including any of your claims that atheism is true and Christianity's false? We shouldn't. Yet you're claiming that atheism is true and we're molecular machines. Well, if we truly are molecular machines, we have no way of knowing it. Because as molecular machines, we're not really thinking, we're just reacting. So you always, or should, I should say, you should always try and question the assumptions that people are making in their arguments. And the questions you can ask are, what do you mean by that? And how'd you come to that conclusion? Those are questions from Greg Koukl's book, Tactics. Always ask questions. Now, as I say, when you're in an artificial situation that, like I am sometimes in front of a group of people on a college campus, you don't always have time to dig too deeply into the assumptions because you only have a couple of minutes to make a point and you got to move on to the next person. But for most of us, when we're having conversations with people one-on-one, we can take the time to go through and ask about the assumptions the person is making when they're making their claims against Christianity or against God. So how do you win an argument? Question the assumptions. See if they're self-defeating. See if they're using a standard that their worldview does not afford them. That's the easiest way to win an argument. Not a fight, as I said. If you're in a fight, they don't care what you say. But if you're in a true argument where people are open, they're trying to discover the truth, try those techniques. That's what I use. That's what I learned at Southern Evangelical Seminary, ses.edu. If you're interested in learning more, that's how I've learned, and I use that more than any other thinking tactic I can think of. Always look at the assumptions behind the argument. All right, Jorge, do we have anybody ready to interact with us on
Absolutely,
Skype?
Frank. We got a couple of people here lined up,
Right.
and I will ask you to pick a question or two so I can get them in and line them
Okay.
up so we can do some rapid fire.
All right, let me look at some of the people that have written in. One says, how can I believe in a God that created me sick, original sin, and commanded me to be well? Good question from Christopher Hitchens. That's what Christopher Hitchens used to ask. Well, first of all, of course, Christians don't believe he created you sick. He did create you well, and our own sin put us in that problem, put us in that predicament where we have original sin. But even without original sin, I don't think any one of us would make it our entire lives without sinning. And so we're still going to have someone else pay for our punishment if we can't pay it ourselves, or we're going to have to pay it ourselves. And that's what Christ came to solve. Look, original sin is not, but now we're assuming a standard, right? We're assuming a standard beyond ourselves, but neither is the solution to original sin fair. If you're going to assume that original sin is true. Why? Because, and I'm experiencing some.
Go ahead. You're good. You're good. Keep going.
All right. Sorry. A whole bunch of stuff came on my screen there for a second. And that's evil, by the way. If you're going to say original sin isn't fair, okay, fine. But the solution that gets you out of original sin isn't fair either. It's not fair that God actually absolves you of your sin and your wrongdoing for free. It's not fair. It's beyond fair. It's called grace. Look, if God allows us to get into trouble, but then throws us a life preserver to save us, he's demonstrating that he loves us, and he's given us free will to make a free choice whether to follow him or not. If we decide we don't want the life preserver, that's our fault. That's not his. God is graciously saving us from the sin that we committed. And that's what Christianity is all about. In fact, Christianity is the answer to the problem of evil. People always ask, why is there evil in the world? Well, because God gave us free will. Why did he give us free will? So we could love. If we don't have free will, we can't love. We would just be moist robots. This wouldn't be a moral world. But of course, the free will gives us the opportunity to do evil. And once Adam did evil and then the rest of us did evil, now we're in trouble. So what does God do? He enters the bloodstream of humanity to take evil upon himself. And by trusting in him, we can have that evil diverted to him rather than us. That's what Christianity is all about. It's the answer to the problem of evil. So, and by the way, it's a good question that it looks like Joshua asks. That question also assumes a moral standard. When you say, how can I believe in a God that created me sick, original sin, and commanded to be well? You're assuming that it would be immoral for God to do that, even if he really did that. By what standard are you claiming that that is immoral? Okay, here's what you can do if you're not a Christian, but you are a theist. You can say, look, I believe in God, but I don't think the God of the Bible is the right God. Okay, that's a fair way of putting it, because you might say, well, I think the God of the Bible is immoral for whatever reason. Why? Because now you have a standard other than the God of the Bible to claim that the God of the Bible isn't the true God, a moral standard by which you can judge the God of the Bible is immoral. Here's the problem you run into, however. When you look at the evidence, it turns out that the God of the Bible is the true God. Because if Jesus rose from the dead, and the evidence shows that he did, then whatever Jesus teaches is true because he's God. And he taught the entire Old Testament as the word of God, and he promised the New Testament. So if Jesus rose from the dead, the God of the Bible is the true God, and he is the standard. And when you look at things in the Old Testament, we don't have time to get into them all here. God is not killing people in the Old Testament without a reason. It's judgment. It's not genocide. It's judgment. In fact, God kills all of us at a certain point, doesn't he? I mean, if he exists and he's the one that pulls his hand away from us, he kills us all at a certain point. It's up to him, not us. Anyway, do we have somebody ready to come on?
Yeah, we got Joshua coming on right here. Welcome to the show, Joshua. If you are muted, unmute yourself and go ahead.
Joshua, how are you?
I'm doing well. I hope you are.
Yeah, where are you?
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Where are you?
Atlanta, Georgia.
Hot Atlanta, Georgia, just down the road from Charlotte. Great, man.
Yeah, I was just outside, and oh my goodness, it was hot. It was really
we
hot.
just had Elsa come through here. I know you did, probably a few hours before us, and man, it left a lot of rain and a lot of humidity. But what do you want to talk about?
So my question is something that you're pretty much an expert in, and it's the old question of objective and versus subjective morality. Which one's the most probable one? I was discussing with somebody yesterday, and I had another question, but since I was discussing this with somebody yesterday, it really popped up, and I wanted to ask you this question since you're the expert in it.
I'll see. We'll see here in a minute, won't we?
Yeah, we will. But he was saying that in order for something to be objective, it has to be 100% true. And you see all throughout history,
all right, wait a minute. Time out. Okay, as soon as someone says something like that, you want to ask them, first of all, Josh, what do you think his assumption is when he says that? What is he assuming when he says it has to be 100? First of all, what does he mean by 100% true? Does he mean 100% provable? Or does he mean
everybody has to follow it? Like, if it's objective, we all have to follow this, for lack of better words, we all have to follow, the biblical standard of morality, because that's
you mean we have an obligation to? Is that what he's saying? Or that we will follow it?
We will follow it. That's what he's saying.
Well, no, that's not true. We have free will. We don't have to follow it.
And
that's the whole point.
I think that's what he's saying, to disprove objective morality. Because
how does that disprove objective morality? How does it disprove it? I don't understand that.
Because you're pretty good. He's saying that if we were obligated to follow it, he was pointing out when we were discussing it yesterday, he was pointing out Genghis Khan and his funeral, everybody had to people had to kill each other to Genghis Khan wanted people to die. He didn't want anybody to come out of that funeral alive. And the people who killed those people and killed themselves, they thought it was right, and that was their own subjective morality. That's what he was trying to prove in order to say that morality is subjective.
All right, let me ask you this. If some people get their math sums wrong, does that mean math is subjective?
No, I don't think it is.
No, of course it's not. Like if I say 10 plus 10 is 20 and somebody else says it's 21, is math now suddenly relative and subjective? No, just because people get it wrong doesn't mean there isn't a right. And in fact, when your friend is saying, well, Genghis Khan ordered all these people to be killed at his funeral or whatever the story was, what is he assuming? First of all, he's assuming that people are inherently valuable and it would be wrong of Genghis Khan to do that. Well, he's right. But that assumes an objective value to human life, not a subjective value. It's not just Genghis Khan's opinion or Mother Teresa's opinion or Hitler's opinion that people are valuable or not valuable. It comes from a standard beyond us, and that standard.
If you want to continue, I'm sorry to interject, but he was saying the way we apply value to something is by our own moral opinion. So it's a consensus that applies what we apply value to. That's what he was saying. And, obviously he was saying in Nazi Germany, people didn't apply, that value to Jews. And that's why so many of them were killed. And that's what he was trying to argue.
Well, look, people can make errors in moral judgments just like they can make errors in mathematical judgments. But that doesn't disprove the objective nature of morality any more than it disproves the objective nature of mathematics. Because people make errors, that doesn't mean that those disciplines are not objective. In fact, the only way you could know that 21 was wrong to 10 plus 10 equals 20 is if you really knew what the right answer was, if math was objective, right? And it is. And so anytime he makes a moral judgment about morality, he's assuming he knows what right morality is. In fact, if he were to say, I wonder how he would answer this question, Josh. I wonder if he were to say, what he would say if you were to say, what if I decided that everybody needed to obey every law in the Old Testament?
Well, He would say
but would he say it would be wrong if you were to impose that on him? Would he say that was wrong?
He would say, I would believe it's wrong in my own subjective morality. That's what he would.
But it's not really wrong, he would say.
Yeah, basically.
Okay, but first of all, he knows that's not true. Okay, liar, pants on fire. Okay, the Old Testament law was just for Old Testament Israel. I even see people in this chat going, well, the God of the Old Testament did this and did that. Well, the God of the Old Testament was dealing with Israel. He's not dealing with us today. He's getting the promised land, or the promised people in the promised land, to bring forth the promised Messiah to save the whole world. The laws of the Old Testament, particularly the Old Covenant from Exodus 20 all the way through Deuteronomy, are part of the Old Covenant, and that Old Covenant is obsolete. We're bound by the New Covenant. Now, there are principles in the Old Covenant that apply today because they're universal principles. Most of the 10 Commandments are like that, but some of the other laws in the Old Testament have nothing to do with us today. Yet people will claim, on one hand, that all morality is subjective, but as soon as you do something immoral to them, Josh, what do they say? Hey, that's wrong. Like if you were to steal the kid's iPhone or take his iPad or do something, would he just say, well, that's just your opinion or that's just my opinion? No, he would go, hey, that's wrong, man. Give me that thing back, wouldn't he?
Yeah, he would.
In other words, his reactions would tell him the truth about what he really thinks about morality. In other words, we don't really... It's not really clear to us always what's right and wrong when we do wrong things to other people. In other words, we don't know right and wrong by our actions, but we certainly know right and wrong by our reactions. When somebody treats us immorally, we go, hey, dude, that's wrong. Don't do that. I have a right. That's my iPhone, not yours. Give me that thing back. Okay. So he does not believe that all morality is subjective. Kick him in the shins and take his iPhone and see what he does. Okay.
Do you know any books I could, read to get more into this, about this objective morality,
Well, we talk about it in I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. We also talk about it in Stealing from God. You could also go to, William Lane Craig talks about this a lot on his website, reasonablefaith.org. You could go there. You could listen to our podcast, the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast. Just search for morality. We talk about it quite a bit. About a year and a half ago, I probably had 4 or 5 shows in a row on objective morality, so you can look at that. There's plenty of places you can go. Ed Fazer writes some great books that might be helpful to you. He's a little bit more technical. He's a Catholic scholar, a little bit more technical, but F-E-S-E-R. Look, I mean, this is the first book you ought to read other than the Bible, right? Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, if you haven't read that.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, you got to read this, Josh. Forget everything else forget everything I just said. Read this.
Okay.
So read this first.
Okay.
Mere Christianity. Yeah.
All right. And in order to argue better, because I'm going to be honest, I'm not really a good arguer. That Tactics by Greg Koukl, that's also a good one.
Excellent. Yeah, you can't get better than Tactics by Greg Koukl. It's a relatively new update to that book, maybe a year and a half or so it came out. This is, hang on a second. This is Tactics. Looks like this. This is the 10th anniversary edition you want to get. Look, you cannot be a leader unless you're a reader. You cannot be a leader unless you're a reader, because there's no way you can know all this stuff on your own steam. You've got to learn. And the only way you can learn is through your own experience or someone else's experience, or revelation, obviously. And you don't have enough time to learn from your own experience. You've got to learn from other people's experience and revelation. So you got to read the Bible and you got to read good books. All right.
Well, thank you for everything. Especially with the laws of mathematics, you really helped me out with that. So,
okay.
And you also recommend me a lot of good books. So thank you for that.
All right. Thanks so much, Josh. Hope to see you here next time, man. Come on back.
I hope to as well. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot. All right. Let me pick another question off Jorge while we're looking for some.
I actually got one here. I got a super chat, and I want to let everybody know that if you send us super chats, it's number one, easier for us to see because they're like neon color, right? Number two, they help us. So we want to give them priority as well.
And they are morally good.
Hunt, what do you say?
They're morally good. In fact, we love super chats, don't we?
Absolutely.
That's
absolutely.
right. That's right.
We got this. It says, what to say to someone who says, I've been indoctrinated into Christianity, when I say there's indoctrination of certain ideologies through education and so on. So the person is telling Hunter that he's been indoctrinated into Christianity, but when he answers, hey, you also probably been indoctrinated into certain things, how do you answer? How do you dialogue with somebody like that while I bring the other person in, Frank?
I would ask, first of all, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by indoctrination? And secondly, how'd you come to that conclusion? And thirdly, even if you're right, that doesn't mean what I believe is wrong. I could have been indoctrinated into the truth, right? The issue isn't how we arrived at our beliefs. The issue is, because that would be known as the genetic fallacy, that because I learned from somebody who indoctrinated me, everything I know must be wrong. No, that's not true necessarily. I mean, it could be true, but you don't know if it's true. The issue isn't how we got to our beliefs. The issue is, are our beliefs true? And what evidence do we have for those beliefs? So you have to look at the evidence, and you have to go issue by issue. I'm sure there are things I believe that are false. I don't have everything right. And I'm sure the person you're talking to probably is, has the same kind of situation. Some of the things they believe are true. Other things are false. And you have to go case by case or point by point to try and discover whether or not a particular belief is true. Now, once we've used reason to establish that Christianity is true, then we have a reliable source of information, the scriptures, to help us understand what is true. And we don't always have to go back and reevaluate, well, is the Bible still true? No, if you've found enough evidence to believe beyond a reasonable doubt it's true, then it is. The only way the Bible could be completely proven false, or that's not the right word, because I'm sure things in the Bible are true even if it's not inspired, but Christianity would be false if we could prove A, there's no God, or B, Jesus didn't rise from the dead. Those things are hard to disprove, quite obviously. You can't disprove God. It's very hard to do. And I think the evidence is very strong that Jesus rose from the dead. And if that's really the case, then Christianity, what we call mere Christianity, or what C.S. Lewis would call mere Christianity, is true. All right? So claiming that somebody's indoctrinated is sort of like an ad hominem attack. It's attack on the person, and it's not really telling you the truth about whether or not the person has true beliefs. You've got to evaluate them.
Frank Pink, another question, because we're having a little trouble with our guest camera right now.
Okay. Okay, let's see. Someone asked, Dr. Turk, does following God's ways in regard to homosexuality make me homophobic? I show no hatred or prejudice against homosexuals, as Jesus taught us to love one another. Well, the other side's going to call you names. People who don't agree with you are going to call you names. You're a homophobe, right? Well, first of all, what do you mean by homophobic? Because normally phobic means fear, okay? And secondly, what evidence do you have for that conclusion? I mean, should I call you a Christian phobe or a Jesus phobe if you disagree with Jesus? I mean, these words are not helpful when it comes to really getting at the truth. No, I actually think that if Christianity is true, and I think it is, and by the way, even if Christianity is not true, I think from a natural law perspective, you can show that homosexuality is not ideal for human beings. In fact, that's what I do in the book, Correct, Not Politically Correct. I'm not quoting any Bible verses in there. I'm just pointing out that homosexuality is not something that I think you can create a society on. That relationships between men and women are qualitatively better from even a natural law perspective, from a design perspective, and they bring forth benefits to society that no same-sex relationship can ever do. So you can take that route, or you can just point out that, no, to truly love someone, you have to tell them the truth even if they don't like it. You see, love does not require approval. If love required approval, we couldn't be good parents. Why? Because if you approve of everything your kid wants to do, you're not loving. You're actually unloving. You have to stand in the way of evil. You have to say, no, I love you so much, I'm going to oppose what you want to do. We have to do that with our children. We have to do that with other people that we know. It was Thomas Sowell, the famous economist who is almost 91 years old now, who said this: when you tell people what they need to hear, you're helping them. When you tell people what they want to hear, you're helping yourself. Because quite frequently, we don't want to tell people what they need to hear, because we want to protect ourselves from their wrath, because they're going to be mad at us if we disagree with what they're doing. Well, that just goes to show you don't really care about them. You only care about yourself. You really care about protecting yourself rather than really reaching out and helping them. So no, you're not homophobic. You're actually telling the truth to people because you love them. If you didn't love them, you go, I don't care, whatever you want to do is fine. Doesn't matter to me. No, you have to realize that in order to love people, you have to tell them the truth. And sometimes they're not going to like it. All right. All right. Is Sharon
Frank,
ready?
Is Sharon? I think Sharon is ready. So we're going to bring her in, and she needs to tap the little microphone icon. And
there you go, Sharon. I think that worked.
She'll be ready to go. Welcome
Sharon,
to
how
the
are
show.
you?
Is she still muted?
Say something, Sharon.
Oh, no. I think we cannot hear you.
We can't hear you right now. Is your mic? It looks like it was.
It's on. It looks like
unmuted.
it's on. I just don't know what is not coming. Why it's not coming through?
I don't know. Keep looking.
Wait.
As you're doing that, Sharon, I'll pull off another question. Let's see. Kevin asks, are you claiming that atheism is true? Is that a good question to ask? Well, it depends on what atheist you're talking to, because they try and change the meaning of atheism, which means I think it's true there's no God, to I lack a belief in God, which of course is really not saying anything, because to say I lack a belief in God is merely to say, wow, Jorge, what are we doing with the video here?
I don't know. I think that's Sharon. She just added you like 3 times. This is hilarious, man.
This is called a live stream, ladies and gentlemen. How did Sharon take over our video, man?
I don't know.
Is she a Russian spy? What's going on?
She toggled something, man. It's just hilarious. I don't know how she did that. Let me see. Okay. I don't know how to do that, man.
It looks like we're next to the Sea of Galilee now, and we're
toggle mode.
We're just talking heads.
Yeah,
and
Sharon, you cannot turn your mic on. Oh, you can hear her, but really faint. Can you talk a little closer?
Go ahead, just ask it, Sharon. I'll try and give it my best shot. Go ahead.
Well, I've asked you this before. You actually came and spoke at my church, and I worked your book baby when you were in Fort Worth. And I was telling you.
Oh yeah, I remember now. Yeah, thank you, Sharon. Go ahead.
And I remember asking you. I told you that my pastor was not very critical, and you said you were surprised at that. And I know I've heard you many times. You always say, "Sweet and gentle Jesus," you know. Political. How is the church? How can it be political? And if they're not, that good or bad, ours just seems to. And there's nothing wrong with this. We say pray and read the Bible, and I agree with that. But it just seems like in today's world, we should be doing a tad more.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. Yeah, I think I got the question, even though you faded in and out. So let me repeat it. And I don't know, Jorge, if you can do anything about this video now. We may have to drop Sharon, and I'll try and answer it off the air.
Okay, that's good. Okay, okay.
Because something went crazy with Skype when we tried to do this. It's 2 against 1, Sharon. Look at this.
All right, Sharon. Thank you. We'll try to get that answer.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah. All right. Is this the video we have from now on?
No. You're good.
All right.
That was hilarious, man.
All right. Well, we're learning as we go, friends. The question that Sharon was that I heard, and I don't know if you guys heard it, but had to do with politics. Should the church be involved in politics and all this kind of thing, right? And I always ask people when they say that, we just got to preach the gospel and let's not get involved in politics at all. I always ask them, why do you think we ought not get involved in politics? And B, I say to them, if you think the gospel is important like I do, you have to be involved politically. Why? Because the laws that are made in Washington and your state and local governments affect our ability to not only preach the gospel, but live the gospel. And there's no better way to communicate this than to ask somebody to call up an image on the internet of the Korean Peninsula at night. And if you've ever done that, if you ever Google, let me see if I can find it right now. Maybe you can bring it up, Jorge. Korea satellite night.
Hold on.
Let me see. Hang on if I can do it. Okay, here, I got it. Let me see if I can share this, man. If I can share.
Hold on. No. Korea
satellite night. Just pull the image up. See if we can show it to people.
Right. Hold on. Right there, right here. Okay.
All right, let me see it. Let's let everyone see this. Okay. All right. Look at the right side of the screen there. You see that satellite imagery from of the Korean Peninsula? You can see the bottom of that image right there is filled with light. That's South Korea. They have productivity. They have the gospel. North Korea, on the other hand, is a concentration camp. There's one major reason for the difference between South and North Korea. What's the major difference, or the reason for the difference? South Korea has political freedom. The North does not. Now, which country would you rather live in? Would you rather live in South Korea or North Korea? We'd all rather live in South Korea, right? North Korea is a concentration camp. It's awful. You can't preach the gospel in North Korea not legally. You can't live the gospel in North Korea not legally. And politics is the reason that you can do it in the South and you can't do it in the North. So if for no other reason we ought to be involved politically, is we have to get involved politically to protect the ability to live and preach the gospel, religious freedom. And there's a whole bunch of other issues as well. The life issue, the marriage issue. We have to be concerned about these things because society and people are affected by the laws we make in Washington and the laws we make in our state and local governments. And why shouldn't Christians be involved? Are you saying only non-Christians can be involved in politics? Where is that? You say, well, separation of church and state. First of all, separation of church and state has nothing to do with this issue. We're not talking about establishing a church. We're not talking about legislating religion. We're talking about legislating morality, and that's what everybody does. Whether you're a liberal, conservative, or anywhere in between, you're trying to impose a religious, or I should say a moral position. You're not necessarily trying to impose a religious position. You're not trying to say that you have to be a certain religion. You're not telling people where, when, how, or if to worship, but you are telling people how they ought to treat one another, and everybody's trying to do that. All laws legislate morality. The only question is whose morality? And I think we ought to legislate not my morality, not your morality, but the morality, the one that Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. That morality, the morality that he got from the Apostle Paul, who also said it's written on our hearts, that morality ought to be legislated. Not some sectarian religious morality or not some atheistic morality. It ought to be the morality based on the nature of God. That's how our country started. It didn't start saying everyone had to be a Christian. It didn't start by saying there are no objective moral values. It said, no, we're going to have both. We're going to have objective moral values and we're going to have freedom of religion because we're going to ground our rights in God, a theistic God, but we're not going to say that you have to believe in a theistic God or you have to go to church or any of these things. We're just going to say that those rights, the rights that you have, the rights that we all have, the rights that we're putting in our Constitution, the rights that we're putting in our laws, the laws that we're creating are based on God, even though you don't have to believe in God or you don't have to go to church or any of those things. So the republic that the United States created about 245 years ago is an amazing republic, never before done in by any other government. And so far it's lasted this long. I don't know how much longer it's going to last. It's certainly not going to last very much longer if Christians get out of politics and don't exert righteous influence in those areas. So we have to be involved. All right, I could spend hours on that because I wrote 2 books on it. One is called Legislating Morality and the other is called Correct, Not Politically Correct. But we don't have time. We've got to go to the next question, which is from who? Levi?
You got Levy, yeah. Here, you can unmute yourself, man. Just click the little mic button and welcome to the show, bro.
Hey, is it
Hey,
Levi?
how are y'all?
Is
Levi.
it Levi? Hey, Levi.
You got, hey, Frank, guys, you got to let my accent slide, okay? I got that accent swag, so I know Levi won't mind, okay?
Hey, Levi, where are you?
Mississippi.
All right, man. What's going on? What do you want to talk about?
So about ancient Near Eastern biographies. I know that in that culture, in the ancient times when the Bible's being written, they had different standards for writing biographies than Western cultures today do, such as the Gospels, because they're biographies. And we see that chronology wasn't a standard that those cultures put on biographies. And today, people apply these Western standards to the Gospels, see that they don't line up in their events, and say that the Gospels aren't trustworthy. There's contradictions, whatever. So how can we better inform others about, just the way that biographies worked in that time? And in other words, how can we get people to stop using Western lens in the Bible?
Yeah, that's a great question, Levi, because I think that when we're interpreting the Bible, we have to try and put ourselves back into the context in which it was written. Like, for example, when we're looking at Genesis 1, first of all, who is Genesis 1 written to? Genesis 1 was written to the people that had just come out of Egypt in the Exodus. They're not asking the questions that we're asking today. How old is this place? Or, creation, evolution. Or they're not asking those questions. They want to know if Yahweh is the true God, right? They want to know if the Egyptian gods are the true God or Yahweh is the true God. And you look at Genesis 1, it's really a polemic against the Egyptian creation story. That's really what it is. And so we have to put ourselves back in the minds of a Moses follower at the time, not someone who lives 3,500 years later and is trying to ask questions that are 21st century questions and try to shoehorn them into the text. Now, with regard to the Gospels, you're right as well, that the Gospel writers had different standards of writing when they're writing a biography, which is what a gospel is. And my friend Mike Lacona has written a book called Why Are There Differences in the Gospels? I'm looking at it on my shelf right there. And some of what he says, I agree with. Now, there's a few things Mike says that I don't necessarily agree with, but overall, I agree with Mike's thesis there, that there were different literary styles and different standards that the ancient world used to communicate a biography that aren't necessarily the same that we communicate now. One of them is what you just mentioned there, Levi, that they didn't always think that strict chronology was necessary. They also believed that they could rearrange kind of the order of events to make a point. They also believed that they could, what's the other one? I just had it in my head for a second there. They also believed that they could leave certain details out, or they could spotlight one particular character and not refer to the other character. And we even do that today, right? I mean, if you read an account, someone writing an account of, say, a sporting event might focus on one player, and another writer might focus on another player. They're not contradictory; they're actually complementary. And we find that in the Gospels as well. So I think when people are claiming contradictions, we have to ask them, what do you mean by contradiction, number one? And number two, what is this contradiction? And could it just be a difference and not a contradiction?
Yeah. So, like, is there a way to harmonize what's going on there? I think this double standard, in part at least, comes from like this extreme fundamentalist view that the Bible is perfect in every way, and they put this extreme standard on the Bible. So when people go and see that things don't line up, they just say, see, the Bible isn't true or isn't perfect. I think that's at least part of the problem.
When people say that, Levi, again, we have to question the assumption of what they're saying. When they say perfect, you got to ask, what do you mean by perfect? What does that mean practically? Okay. Are you meaning that the Bible was let down on a string from heaven and man didn't have anything to do with it? No, you don't mean that. That's not the definition of inspiration. In fact, Christians hold many different theories of inspiration, but most Christians don't think the Bible was dictated. They think that God used the personalities, even the memory lapses of the writers, and maybe even to make a point. Like, for example, Paul says, I don't even remember who I baptized, right? He says that in, I think, 1 Corinthians 2. You say, well, if he's inspired, why doesn't God cause him to remember? Well, because God is using Paul's personality. And in fact, that memory lapse may have actually been a benefit, because Paul's trying to point out that baptism isn't the issue, the gospel is, right? So he's saying, look, baptism isn't part of the gospel, so I don't even care who I baptized. I don't remember who I baptized outside of a couple of people. The point is that you're saved by grace through faith, not baptism. So I think we have to question people when they say that there's a contradiction, because they're using modern standards of biography, when in fact, when the Gospels were written, they had different standards of what a biography would be.
Yeah, I agree. I think the key is to in Second Peter, he says that they were carried along by the Holy Spirit. And it's that second step right there that's key, is that God used men who were sinful, but they were carried along by the Holy Spirit to communicate what God wanted to communicate to us. And many skeptics will leave that part out, which is the key part.
That's right.
Also,
let me say one other thing, Levi, about this. This is a great question you're bringing up. This is really an intramural debate between Christians about inerrancy. Inerrancy is not something that I think you need to convince an unbeliever of. In fact, the apostles, when Jesus rose from the dead, they didn't go around telling everybody, you got to believe the Old Testament's inerrant. What did they go around doing? They went around saying, look, Jesus rose from the dead. Jesus rose from the dead. They led with the resurrection. Yes. Yeah, right. They led with that, Levi. And inerrancy is a conclusion. It's not a premise. Do you know that Christianity can be true and inerrancy false? Now, I don't think that's the case. Don't get me wrong. But what I'm saying here is, even if you were to find an error in the Bible, that wouldn't negate the whole thing, no more than it would negate the entire ESPN website if you find one mistake in a box score of a baseball game, right? You don't say, well, everything on the ESPN website is wrong because of it. What's that?
Because as you put it, Christianity is based on an event, not on the New Testament itself, right?
That's right. Christianity is based on it. Let me say it this way. Christianity originated with an event. It didn't originate with a book. Okay. There were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written. Why? Because people had witnessed the resurrected Jesus. That's why they wrote the Gospels, and that's why they wrote the epistles down, because they had witnessed the resurrected Jesus. In other words, the New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. We wouldn't have documents written down in the first century by Bible-believing Jews unless Jesus rose from the dead. Nobody would invent this. There's no reason to invent it. So inerrancy is a debate among Christians. It's not something that should keep a skeptic out of the kingdom, because if Jesus rose from the dead, Christianity is true. Whether or not there are minor errors in the text is irrelevant to that point.
That's a good point. Also, you and I were in an interview about a couple of weeks ago for my podcast, and I just wanted to thank you again for that. That was awesome. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Levi. I knew I recognized you, man. Thanks for coming on the show.
Of course. I appreciate you.
All right. Thanks, brother. We'll do it. We'll do the podcast again, man. Tell everybody what your podcast called so they'll know.
I think he jumped off, Frank.
Oh, he did. I missed it. Okay.
Yeah, I think he was having a little bit of connection issues right at the end. So we have another one. Just go ahead and pick one up, and I'll try to get Gabe in.
All right. Let me see what I got here in terms of questions. Question: what book do you give atheists at a college campus who say they will read a book? I either give them, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, or Stealing from God. I just want to know whether or not they're open. So I always ask them that. And if they are open, I'll give it to them. Another person asked a question: if God is not the author of evil, why does he claim otherwise in Isaiah 45:7? Well, the Isaiah 45:7 translation is not a good translation. It doesn't say God created evil. It says he created calamity, i.e. judgment. Yes, God judges people, and it's calamity to us. But God did not create evil. He didn't create moral evil. It's not moral evil for God to judge people who are deserving of judgment. So Isaiah 45:7 doesn't say evil. I know the King James may say that, but it really means calamity, and it means judgment. Judgment is righteous. Evil is not. Okay. All right. Awesome. Who else do we got?
We got Gabe. Gabe, go ahead on and unmute your mic, brother.
Hey guys, how's it going? Can you hear me?
Gabe, where are you, man? You must be a little bit west. Where are you?
Yes, sir. I am in Ankeny, Iowa.
Ankeny, Iowa, man. Great. What do you want to talk about?
So, man, great conversations throughout this whole thing. It makes me think of so many more questions. But my initial question has to do with talking to other people about Christ. And I found a handful of my friends and almost all of my immediate family are what I would call theists. They say, there is something up there. I don't know what it is, and I can't put my faith in Jesus Christ.
They can't put their faith in Jesus Christ. Why is that?
That's a great question, Frank. But my question to you is, how can I go about telling them that that Jesus Christ is real when their main doubt is, oh, well, we have all these other gods? And I feel like that's what's really holding most of these people back is I just don't know which one to choose.
Okay, well, I would ask them, have you ever looked into the evidence for Jesus rising from the dead?
Right.
And just ask them that. I would also ask, I had this situation, Gabe. I was at University of Maryland, had to be 15 years ago. I had an atheist come up to me after I did the I don't have enough faith to be an atheist presentation, and he was kind of dissing the New Testament. But it seemed to me he didn't know much about the New Testament. So I asked him, I said, have you ever read the New Testament? And he said, he admitted he hadn't. He was totally flummoxed. And I said to him, look, man, I don't know. I don't care where you were born. I don't care what your religious upbringing was. If you claim to be someone who's truly seeking truth, you have to at least investigate what the most influential human being who ever walked the earth allegedly said and did. You have to at least read it. I mean, come on, right?
Right. So,
I mean, if you're going to call yourself intellectually curious, you've got to investigate that. You may investigate and go, no, I think it's bunk, never happened, it's all wrong. Fine, but don't tell me you're seeking the truth when you haven't even read the Gospels.
Right. And so I did mention, I used that exact argument against one of my closest friends, and his comeback to that was, oh, well, it was written by man, so I can't trust it. And I know I've seen a million of your Q&As on YouTube. So,
all right, how would you respond to that? Go ahead, Gabe. How did you respond?
So do you believe in science? Like, do you believe in molecules and textbooks that prove that? And, he said, oh, well, you're right. But I think it's kind of a touchy subject when you start talking about a holy power or the Most High. And
yeah, of course it is. Yeah, because really the issue is people don't want it to be true, because if it's true, then they can't do what they want to do morally. But no, if someone says this is written by man or said by man, you can say, well, you're a man. Why should I believe anything you say?
Right.
Right. Just because something is written by man or comes from people, whatever, that doesn't mean it's wrong. Okay. Do you know by the way, let's go back to inerrancy for a second. Do you realize there are a lot of inerrant books out there? It's not just the Bible.
A lot of them in the schools.
Yeah, especially kid books, like math books. They're all true, right? Everything in there is telling the truth. Sometimes, quite obviously, human beings get it wrong, but a lot of times we get it right. And so to say that because something's written by man or said by a person, I can't trust it, would be defeat the very thing that person just said, because they're a person who just said something. Why should I believe it? And secondly, it's just contrary to the facts. Sometimes human beings get it right. All right. Cool. So in any event, I think the real issue, Gabe, is with your friends is I think you got to jump to the question I always ask, and that is, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian?
Right. Yep. And
a lot of times, you know what the true answer is? No.
Right. See, the majority of people I'm talking about here, I think they would say yes, just because they talk like they know God, but coming from a Christian, I know that they don't. Like, I see with how they're walking and their fruits, I should say. And so it's just kind of hard evangelizing to them when they don't want to put their trust in Jesus Christ because of whatever reasons.
Yeah, that's really the issue. That's why I think that question just cuts to the chase, because it gets rid of all the volitional objections people have. When you ask, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? Or you could ask it differently and say, if Jesus rose from the dead to prove he was God, would you follow him? Right? If they hesitate or say no, the problem is not in their head. It's not a logic issue or an evidence issue. It's a heart issue. They don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God, because they want to be God of their own lives, and they think the God of the Bible is going to get in the way of what they want to do. Right. In fact, I think our biggest problem is not atheism; it's apatheism. Right? People don't care. They don't want it to be true. They want to go their own way. And in America, most of us don't struggle from too much pain. We struggle from too much pleasure.
Yep.
Right? And we're just looking for our next fix, thinking that's going to be the thing that's going to make everything right. Our next relationship, our next paycheck, our next iPhone upgrade, our next computer upgrade, right? Our next Netflix series or whatever. We think all that's going to make life meaningful. No, it's not. Sorry. Okay. It's not going to fulfill you. As C.S. Lewis famously said, if I find myself with a desire that this world can't quite fill, the most logical explanation is that I was made for another world. And we all were. We're made for another world.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate
All right.
your input, Frank, and it's an honor to be able to sit down and speak with you.
Same with you, Gabe. Thank you so much for calling in, and just start using those questions on people and see what they say. Look, questions are easy, answers are hard. You can ask questions all day and not even know anything, right? Just keep asking questions. All right?
Awesome.
All right.
Amen. God bless.
You too, man. Thanks so much for being on. All right, let me pull a...
Frank, I actually got Dylan here, and he says, super chat Dylan, 64.95. He says, speaking of ESPN.
64.95. Are we send him a set of knives or something?
No. Listen. Speaking of ESPN, I canceled my ESPN Plus membership. I feel like you deserve it more. So he sent us the 64.95.
Thanks, man. But I'm kind of weaning myself off most sports anyway. I'm so tired of the politics in sports. I mean, can't we just enjoy sports for sports? Does everything have to be political now? It's crazy, isn't it? Anyway. Yeah. Anyway, so do we have someone else, or am I going to a question?
Just go ahead and pick a question up, and I'll bring Esmar in.
Okay, here's a question. Esmar, all the way from the Faroe Islands. I know Esmar. All right. Shane says, what are some tactics you can use when engaging someone who doesn't believe in absolutes? Well, you can ask them, are they absolutely sure they don't believe in absolutes? And what do they mean they don't believe in absolutes? And what is an absolute in their mind? Okay, because are they talking about moral absolutes, or are they talking about truth absolutes? Look, it's self-defeating to say there are no truths or true absolutes. It's not self-defeating to say there are no moral absolutes, because that's not a moral absolute. It's just self-defeating practically to say it. Because like as our previous caller, I think it was Joshua who said their friend was saying, well, I think all morality is subjective. Well, the easiest way to disabuse somebody of that is to do something immoral to them. They're not going to think it's just subjective. If you steal their iPhone, or, you steal $1,000 from them, they're not going to say, well, it's just your opinion that that's right or that's wrong or whatever. They're going to say, no, it's really wrong to do that. Look, people already know that saying murder's wrong. You just need to remind them of it. This is why Jay Budziszewski, the great professor down at UT Austin who wrote the book What You Can't Not Know, said he used to try and tell his students who claimed that they didn't believe murder was wrong, he used to try and convince them it was wrong, and he finally gave up on that. He said, instead, what I do now is I say, look, you really don't have any doubt that murder's wrong, do you? And all the students go, no, I really don't have any doubt. Okay, good, because you already know that. I'm just dredging up what you already know. Okay, so you can't convince somebody of something they already know. You can just remind them they already know it. They already know murder's wrong. They already know torturing babies for fun is wrong. And by the way, knowing it isn't really the issue when it comes to talking to an atheist, because an atheist already knows murder's wrong. And sometimes they'll say, look, I don't need God to know murder's wrong. And we will say, of course you don't. And you don't need God to be a good person either. You don't need to believe in God to be a good person. The only problem you have is you can't justify what good is or what right and wrong are unless God exists. It's an ontological issue, not an epistemological issue. Epistemology is how you know something is wrong. Ontology is the study of why something is wrong. Why is there this standard out there that says murder's wrong? In fact, let me give you a quick illustration of how you might communicate this to somebody before we bring Esmar in, and that is this. I can read a book and know what a book says and also deny there's an author, right? I mean, I can do that. I can read a book and say, look, I know what this book says, but nobody wrote it. You can say that. That's true. The problem is there would be no book to read or know unless there was an author. Same thing is true in morality. You can know right and wrong and deny God exists. There just would be no right or wrong unless God exists. See, that's the problem that atheists have. They think we're dealing with epistemology. No, we're not talking about epistemology. We're not talking about how we know right and wrong. We're talking about why is something right or wrong? Why is there a standard that presses on all of us that says love and don't hate, love and don't murder? And that we're obligated to obey those commands because there's a standard beyond us to whom we're obligated. All right, let's bring Esmar on all the way from the Faroe Islands.
All right, there you go, Esmar.
A frequent student in our online Christian courses. Did I say that right? Our courses at Online Christian Courses. Anyway, yes, Esmar, what's going on? There you go. Are you going to be in Stealing from God? Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case? Okay, beautiful. Yeah, we're starting that on August 2nd. So anyone wants to be a part of that, you can sign up soon.
Hey,
yeah, what?
Frank.
What?
Both of you guys, actually, I just raised you Stealing from God, but in Spanish right here. So I understand English and Spanish.
In Spanish?
I raised it in Spanish, so there you go.
Beautiful.
There you go. Well, I go back to Esmar. There you go.
You know, Jorge, you're kind of magical.
There you go. That's me, man.
Yeah,
you haven't seen the glitter in my beard yet, man. I'll save that for Christmas. Yeah.
You got glitter in your beard?
Oh, you didn't see those pictures? It was a style a while back. Yeah.
I did not see the glitter in the beard, man.
Yeah, man.
Sorry. All right, Esmar, what are we talking about, man? What do you want to talk about?
All right, can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Okay. Right.
And you don't really sound scary like Jorge sometimes does. But go ahead.
Sometimes I do.
But yeah, my initial question was if I'm ever in a conversation or argument, if I realize that it turns more emotional rather than intellectual, how should I be, or what should I say, I guess?
Well, I think the easiest thing to say is if you're having a conversation with somebody and it gets pretty emotional, all you need to do is look at them and say, now look, we're all adults here, Mr. Poopy Pants. Come on, that deserves a laugh, don't you think? Come on. That wasn't that bad. Come on, that's Leslie Nielsen from Airplane or something, or one of those Naked Gun movies. Anyway, but if it gets emotional, I think what you can do is resort to what Greg Kokel, one of his tactics, if I can remember it correctly, he says, hey, look, I'm sorry, I'm not here to touch a negative chord here. I understand this is an emotional issue, so maybe we can talk about this another time, or I'm sorry if I said something that triggered you to get emotional. I don't want it to be emotional. I'd rather just try and stay as factual as we can, right? And just leave it at that. So you might want to take that approach. And Greg has a lot of new tactics, again, in the updated edition of the tactics book, the 10th anniversary edition. You got it? Okay. Yeah. See, I think he probably has something like that. I'm vaguely remembering that tactic, Esmar, that he would say, just let's dial it down here and say, hey, I'm sorry that this has gotten emotional. I'd rather just speak about the facts. Maybe we can pick this up another time. And if the person then retreats from the emotion and goes, oh, I'm sorry. No, let's resume. Fine. If they don't, then pick it up another time.
Yeah, I know he mentioned that a principle, if either me or the other party got angry or frustrated, you've already lost.
Right. Everyone loses. Yeah. I think Greg puts it this way. He said, if I get mad, I lose. If he gets mad, I lose. Or see, whoever you're talking. So you'd rather try and keep it on the facts. And that's sometimes hard to do. And it's especially hard, I think, because what we tend to do is we tend to have so many assumptions in our mind as to why a particular person holds a particular position. And many of those assumptions may be false. And what I try and do when somebody particularly asks me a question on a college campus, and even if they're a little bit hostile, I try and remember that, look, when I was this kid's age, I didn't agree with everything I agree with now. Why should I expect this kid right now in 2021 to agree with me at his stage of life when I didn't even agree with me at that stage of life? Or I don't know this person's background, right? I don't know where they came from. I don't know what they've been taught. I don't know what breaks they've gotten or troubles they've lived through. They may have what they think are good reasons for believing what they believe, even if they disagree with what I think is true. And I also think back to Paul, who I think said in 1st or 2nd Timothy, I think he said something like, I was an insolent and arrogant man because I tried to persecute the church, but God showed me mercy because I acted in ignorance and unbelief. So Paul was humble, knowing that he was somebody that needed mercy and grace. And so we should also be that way when we're dealing with people who don't agree with us. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else?
No, not really. Or if I could briefly ask if
Yeah,
you
go
had
ahead.
any book recommendations on Christian living, if you.
Christian living, like sanctification kind of issues, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
Uh-huh. Well, again, let me recommend Mere Christianity. It's still the one I go to with so much good insight on even on Christian living. Like Lewis's chapter on marriage. Whenever I conduct a marriage, whenever I officiate a marriage, I tell them you've got to read the chapter on marriage in Mere Christianity because it's so insightful as to what true love really is. So, Mere Christianity is certainly something they ought to look into. Let me see what else I have on my shelf here. Knowing God by J.I. Packer, classic. You ought to definitely read that. See what else I've got here that a lot of people, I haven't read a lot of Dallas Willard, but a lot of people love Dallas Willard in that area. Divine Conspiracy. You may look into that. Other than the Bible, obviously, there's a lot of Christian living that goes on there, as you know. Let's start there.
Willard?
Yeah, Dallas Willard. Yeah, Dallas Willard, who was a philosopher and a teacher out at University of Southern California, who died probably 6 or 7 years ago. But he has some great stuff on that issue as well. So check into those guys, and I'll see you again, Esmar.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
See you in the course.
All right. Esmar's talking about the course Stealing from God, Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case. Just go to crossexamine.org, click on online courses. We only take a limited number of people in the premium version, which means we'll be live on Zoom, interacting, Q&A, that kind of thing. If you want to be a part of that, you better sign up soon. Or Jorge, who else do we have?
Frank, we got the last one, and we have one last super chat here, and we got Dan, and I think he was trying to ask this earlier. He says, do you believe that all the disciples were Jews? In Matthew 10:4, one of the disciples is referred to as Simon the Canaanite. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to look into the context of that. If he was not a Jew, but he was a believer, and one of the disciples or one of the apostles. See, there's a difference. There were a lot of disciples, but was he one of the 12? Is that what it says? I'd have to look it up.
I don't know. We'll have to look it up. Yeah, I don't have it in front of me.
We'll have to look it up. But the people, I guess he might be referring back to the point I was making earlier that, or I don't know if I made it today, but I normally make the point that all of the writers of the New Testament, with the exception of Luke, were all Jewish believers in Yahweh. That's certainly true. Except we don't know who wrote Hebrews, but obviously he must have been a Hebrew of some kind, right? Okay, so you've got obviously Matthew, Mark, Luke is a Gentile. You've got John, you've got Jude, you've got Paul, Peter, the writer of Hebrews. I don't know if I'm leaving somebody out. James, he's a believer. He's the half brother of Jesus, right? These are all believers in Yahweh. They thought they were God's chosen people. You say, why is that important, Frank? Because God's chosen people didn't believe in two things that Christianity came to believe. Number one, that someone could claim to be God, a human being. And number two, that somebody would rise from the dead in the middle of time. They all believed that somebody would rise from the dead at the end of time, but they didn't believe anybody would rise from the dead in the middle of time. And so for Jewish believers in Yahweh to actually say, and then go to their death saying that Jesus claimed to be God and rose from the dead, can't be invented. They never would have invented this. And those are the people that wrote the New Testament, with the exception of Luke, who was a Gentile.
All right.
As far as
so we got our great friend Chris back online. Chris, you can unmute your mic now, and welcome to the show, brother.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
clear,
Chris.
man.
Oh, it sounds like you're like a radio guy with that microphone, man. Where are you?
That's right. Yeah, I am in Knoxville. I've called in a couple times, and currently in my my son's room while he's saying, "Please don't put me on video." So.
Usually, most kids are like, "Yeah, put me on video, Dad. Come on."
I told him, like, this thing will be seen by thousands of people, millions maybe.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, only if my mom watches it 1,000,000 times. But anyway, go ahead,
right.
Chris. What do you want to talk about?
Yeah. So, anyway, I had an interesting conversation with a good friend of mine who I've talked to you about before, but you have talked a lot about this tonight. So that's what inspired me really to get on here. is this country being founded on Christian principles as opposed to theistic principles, right? So so for instance, was Thomas Jefferson a Christian, or did he just believe in a higher power? As opposed to, actually, we know there were some founding fathers and people to be in there absolutely, Christians, and they were very clear about that. But really, actually, until this past Sunday, when my pastor read a quote from Thomas Jefferson, I wish I had on me right now, but where it actually cited his Christian belief. It was the first one I've ever heard that was clearly Christian. And of course, it makes me want to research as to when in his life it was spoken. Was it early or late in his life? Did he come to Christianity later? Yeah. But I'm sorry, I just want to get the rest of this out, and I'll let you finish there, Frank. So my friend has a we talked about this a lot. He's like, look, I don't subscribe that this country is a Christian nation. He said I asked him, what political party are you affiliated with? He's like, well, I don't really have to affiliate myself with any political party, but if I was anything, I'd be a theocrat.
A theocrat.
Yeah.
And
like, so. Yeah.
What theocracy does he want to impose?
He's a Christian, 100%. He said he wants it. He wants Christian doctrine, or use the term credo earlier, written into the I guess the documentation or even the constitution of a country. He thinks that until he can see it, which is what the kingdom of heaven is going to be. It'll be a theocracy, if you will.
Right. Yeah. Well, first of all, I would ask clarification. What does he mean by that? Because I mentioned earlier that we're not trying to legislate religion, but we are trying to legislate morality. However, some of the principles, obviously, between religion and morality are consistent. For example, thou shalt not murder is one of the 10 commandments. It's also part of our moral legislation that we've put into practice here, right? In fact, just about every one of the 10 commandments, or I should say every one of our laws that are good laws, are somehow a derivative of the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not steal, right? We have laws against fraud and felony home invasion and larceny, and they're all related to thou shalt not steal. Just because it's in the Bible doesn't mean we're legislating a religion. We're legislating moral principles consistent with the Bible, because the Bible and the moral law written on our hearts come from the same source, God. But we don't have to try and force people. We can't force people anyway. You can't force anybody to be a Christian. Okay. We're not trying to force people through law to practice Christian principles, other than certain moral principles, which are consistent with the natural law, the moral law that also comes from God. But we're not telling them they have to be a Christian or they have to participate in certain rites or rituals or any of that. I would be against that. I don't want that to be the case. And so I would have to ask him, Chris, what he means by that and how far he wants to impose what he means by Christian doctrine.
So I think, and if to be completely honest with you, I think that he's really using a little hyperbole, because he just really is talking, and the kingdom of heaven is going to be when it happens, ultimately it'll be, every knee shall bow, right? Every tongue confess. So then in that aspect, absolutely. It'll be for lack of a better term, I can't think of a better term than this, but a theocracy. But he just said he wasn't convinced that this country, because you hear people say it a lot, that this country was based on Christian principles. But
you see, that needs to be unpacked. What do they mean by that? Christian principles. Right. Did the founding fathers get a lot of their ideas from the Bible? Yes. 34% of their quotations came from the book of Deuteronomy, actually, or from the Torah, I should say. That's John Edsmo, easy for me to say. John, his book's up here somewhere. It's an older book called Restoring the Constitution. He makes that point. But that doesn't mean that because they're getting principles from Christianity that they're trying to force everybody to be a Christian. So when people say, is this a Christian country? I might say descriptively, yes, it was a Christian country, but not prescriptively, because we did not try and prescribe people that they had to be a Christian. We did prescribe that they had to act in certain moral ways consistent with Christianity, Christianity, but we didn't say they had to be a Christian in order to do so, or we didn't say they had to be a Christian by law. That's impossible anyway.
Yeah, and it is impossible. I absolutely agree with you. And I think that your statement earlier about whether we should be involved in politics, I think that people who say that we shouldn't be, I really think that's they're speaking that maybe from a good heart, if you will, because they don't want to. Or maybe not even a good heart, really. It's they're speaking from a societal outlook. You know, you don't want to talk about religion. You don't want to talk about your politics. You know, with other people. I hear that a lot. Well, I heard that a lot growing up, at least. But yeah, if we want to protect things that are important to us, then we should absolutely be involved in politics to some degree.
Not only that, but we think, and I hope all of us think, that the principles that God has given us through His natural law are principles that benefit all people, even principles that they may not like. Like, for example, marriage is between a man and a woman. That benefits all people. And if we had time, I could explain why. I don't have time right now.
I know
the
why.
fact that the fact that we ought to protect innocent life, that helps all people. It does nobody any good to make abortion the law of the land, and then a woman goes and get an abortion. She's actually not only killing her baby, she's hurting herself. She's hurting herself morally. She's hurting herself psychologically, emotionally, even medically to a certain extent. It doesn't help anybody to make it legal. And yet what we're trying to say is these principles are good for everybody, even though some people don't agree with that. And so we're trying to put in principles that we think are best for society, given the fact that society ought to try and make human beings flourish, and these are the laws that help make human beings flourish. The fact that they're consistent with Christianity is just based on the very notion that God is the source of both the Bible and the moral law, the natural law that He gives us. But we don't have to impose Christianity by law. That's impossible anyway, because it has to be freely chosen by the individual.
Sure, absolutely. You know, I did want to raise one little thing, and then you can address it or not. That's totally fine. It's something that I originally wanted to ask you a while back, and I've never actually done this question because I felt that it might be slightly controversial. But, you know, with the climate in our nation, and, you know, don't misunderstand me. I don't believe this climate that we're seeing in the political sphere is new. I think we've seen it for a very long time. It's just a lot of things are being drawn to light. You know, what I was getting at is, at what point do Christians, you know, as a body, right, as the body of Christ, decide to stand up? And I mean, maybe I guess, have some sort of civil disobedience. And for lack of a better expression, I'm not talking about rioting by any means, never in a million years. And I'm not talking about anything that would be violent in any way. But what I'm basically just saying is just saying no to certain things, because a lot of people don't understand the power that, you know, say your local government has. Like, everybody gets focused on what's going on up in Washington, you know, and they forget that, you know, if they pass a law there, well, your sheriff has to enforce it, and so does your mayor, and so does your governor. So there's a lot of, that's why the states have the power, right? So, but there are certain things that at the end of the day, we're the people, we're supposed to have the power. Right.
All right,
and
let me jump in here, Chris, because we're already over time. But yes, and I've done some podcasts on this. The point here is that Christians are obligated to disobey the government whenever the government tells us to do something God says don't do, or prevents us from doing something God says to do. So those are the two reasons we ought to be civilly disobedient. And the way you just put it is correct. We're not talking about violence. We're just talking about saying, no, we're not going to do that. Like, for example, if we were living in China and they said you had to abort your second child, we go, no, we're not going to do that. Or if they say we can't go to church on Sunday when the Bible says we ought to, no, we're not going to. Oh, that'll never happen. Are you kidding me? Anyway, no, these are things that Christians ought to stand up and say, no, sorry. Or use my personal pronouns. No, sorry, not going to do that, because that wouldn't be respecting you as someone made in the image of God. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to tell you the truth, even if you don't want me to tell you the truth. Okay?
Yeah.
Because I care about you, even if you don't like the fact that the way I care about you, you think is wrong. I think it's right, and I'm going to try and love you the best way I know how, and that is to tell you the truth. But thank you for the question, Chris. Yes, we have to be disobedient, not in a violent way, but we need to say, no, we're not going to do certain things. And by the way, if more people start saying no, then many of these problems are going to go away. We don't even have to convince people outside the church. If we can just convince the church to stand with Christ, the nation would be largely cured of all these ills.
Absolutely.
But I got to go. Thank you. All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, Chris. Thanks for being with us. But man, we got to go because we're
Frank.
already
I got a few questions here from Super Chats that I was notified by our great team of admins here at the YouTube channel. Just a few of them, not many, but we do want to honor this. First one is Doberfit says no questions here, just a thank you. Super chatted $12. We have Wolpack Podcast says, how do you attribute the divinity of Christ from an Old Testament standpoint when those in conversation hold the principle of agency for the angel of the Lord? My quick response to this is go check out Naked Bible Podcast. The angel of the Lord, not all the time, but sometimes, and most of the time, is the pre-incarnate Christ. Now, we cannot say that it's Jesus because it's a pre-incarnate second person of the Trinity, but a lot of the good arguments by somebody like Heiser and Old Testament theologians make that point that the angel of the Lord is actually Yahweh, is what is called the two powers in heaven. And this Tiger, I think, is the writer of the book called Two Powers in Heaven. You can go to Amazon and you can actually look at this idea of the visible Yahweh and the invisible Yahweh. And
I think there's one place, Jorge, we can say it was Jesus, because in Isaiah 6, where Isaiah goes into the temple and he says he sees the Lord in the train of the Lord's robe, actually John in John chapter 12 tells us that was Jesus.
Yep, absolutely.
Anyway, that's a good answer what you gave. What's the next one?
We have another one. He says, Ramin says, what's your take on Bart Ehrman saying that we don't have the original documents, which leads to us not to have the true message?
Nonsense. The way to have the true message is to not have the original document. Why? Because if you had the original document, somebody could corrupt it. But if you have copies spread all over the ancient world, you can compare the copies and reconstruct the original. And if you find some copies that have been tampered with, you're going to know they're tampered with, because all the other ones agree with one another. So actually, by not preserving the original, God can preserve the original better.
Yeah, that's what Kokol says, that, you know, if you want to change a line in the news report from the paper from, 2 days ago, you have to collect all of them. That's right. Why the case is so robust.
You can't do it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Damon Zab says, how can humans have free will if God has already decided fate? In Daniel, Alexander the Great was prophesied to be a ruler before he was born. Did he have free will if his actions were predetermined? And I know you're going to knock this out.
Here's the short answer. We're not predetermined to say that right now. But no, here. The short answer, as you well know, Jorge, is the fact that just because God knows what you're going to do doesn't mean he's causing you to do it, right? Just for example, when my grandson is here with me today, he's 10 months old. When his mother puts him down tonight upstairs, she knows he's going to wake up at some point to eat, right? But because she knows that doesn't mean she's causing him to wake up. Right. She just knows that he's going to do that. Knowing something is going to happen doesn't necessarily take away the free will of the individual doing it. If God is outside of time and can see the end from the beginning, he knows what we're freely going to do. That's not a contradiction if he's outside of time, and he is. So we are chosen but free. And my co-author, Dr. Norman Geisler, wrote a book called Chosen but Free, if you want to go further in that.
Absolutely. We want to thank Angelia, just sent $4.99. And with that, thanks everybody for being here at the Hope One Show. Frank, leave us with a message of hope, and then we are out of here, bro.
Yeah, the message of hope is always Jesus. I love what Peter said to Jesus at the end of his interaction with him. At the end of John chapter 6, after Jesus says, if you want to be my disciples, you must eat my flesh and drink my blood. And the text says, many of the disciples said, this is a hard teaching. We can't follow this guy anymore. And then Jesus turns to Peter and he says, are you going to leave too? And the most intelligent thing Peter ever said, I think, in the scriptures was this: Lord, you have the words of eternal life. To whom else should we go? I mean, think about that. Think about that. Who else is like Jesus in the history of the world? Who else has been confirmed to have risen from the dead? Who else has died for our sins? Who else has the key to eternal life? Who else can pay for our sins? Nobody else but Jesus. Where else are you going to go? What other worldview, number one, is true? And what other worldview, number two, can give you the same kind of benefits that Christianity can? None other. Amen. So Jesus is the way. Jesus is always our hope. And thankfully, he's given us evidence that that's exactly true.
Amen. All right, Frank.
All right.
See y'all next week.
See you all next week. And for those of you that want to be a part of the course, go to crossexamine.org, click on online courses. You'll see it there. All right. See you next time. God bless.